The Senators smashed the Maple Leafs in a Battle of Ontario. Welcome into Rinkwide Toronto, sponsored by Bodog. Free casino games and sports odds. It is time to play at bodog.net. Rob Wong joined alongside by David Alter, comes to us from Scotiabank Arena, where the Maple Leafs got crushed 6-2 by the Ottawa Senators as they began life without Auston Matthews, who it was announced prior to the morning skate that he will be out a minimum of 3 weeks with a knee sprain. And who knows, Dave, maybe the outcome would have been similar with Auston Matthews in the lineup, but for at least one game, with the news breaking earlier today, it was not good. This one, you just got to flush and hopefully move on to the next one. It started okay, but it didn't take long before things really fell apart. There's a lot to get to this in this game. Of course, Auston Matthews, the news that I mentioned, but goalie controversy, goalie weirdness going on with Matt Murray taking the pregame warm-up, but ultimately not starting the game as Ilya Samsonov was in there. So just a very, very bizarre game and a bizarre day, in fact, for the Maple Leafs.
Yeah, so of course the Auston Matthews thing is the start of the day, right? We've got that. But then Matt Murray is finally supposed to play. And, it was a bit strange, but not too out of the realm of explanation as to why Samsonov was going on this run. He had looked like he had separated himself from Ilya Samsonov. Well, it didn't look like Matt Murray was dealing with anything, but apparently he was, because he was scheduled to go today. And as you mentioned, he doesn't come out for the start of the game, even though he led the team out for warm-ups at 6:30. And so the weird thing was he was also on the bench, which, Sheldon Keefe said afterwards and explained, why Samsonov couldn't play. But it's also kind of weird that if he couldn't play, why he would still be in full equipment on the bench is a whole other thing. But whatever. So there's that. There were some people surmising that he took a shot off William Nylander's collar. William Nylander quickly diminished the fact that it's probably not that, because he said he was okay, and he didn't get tended to either. So, just really weird. And then here's the other kicker in this is we did talk to Ilya Samsonov after the game, and he was asked, when did you find out you were going to play? And he said he got a text last night from Curtis Sanford, although Leafs PR were very quick to say he did not find out yesterday that he was playing. That's not what happened here. So after all of that, Sheldon Keefe says Ilya Samsonov, or Matt Murray in this case, is dealing with something that had flared up on him. It's not related to the adductor injury, which kept him out for over 3 weeks to close to a month earlier in the season, but it is something that he had been dealing with for a while. So that at least explains the narrative of why Samsonov was playing for as long as he did. Why, I guess they didn't have to reveal that Murray was hurt, but it would have made sense. Like, that would have been a plausible explanation that, okay, maybe, it's not a load management thing. It's an injury situation. So it just made for a really bizarre set of circumstances that for a lot of it was really hard to even concentrate on the game, because the goalie story was just full of all this intrigue and bizarreness that all through the game we were just discussing with ourselves all these theories as to what could be going on, because a lot of it didn't seem to equate. And so, yeah, here we are. And then a really awful spot for Ilya Samsonov, where he has to go in the last second and suffer his first regulation loss in this building in a really strange situation.
Yeah, just really weird everything for the Maple Leafs with the Auston Matthews stuff and then the Matt Murray stuff. I guess we'll see, what happens on Sunday in the next game for the Maple Leafs, if it's Ilya Samsonov or if it's Matt Murray. You would think it's Samsonov if Murray wasn't able to go tonight and this thing is flared up on him. But like you said, he was on the bench in the gear. The Leafs did not want to go to the E-bug, I guess. So worst case scenario, I guess Matt Murray would have been able to play if, truly need be in an emergency case and an emergency basis. But I guess that might also explain, like you said, with Samsonov getting these run of games and, maybe even Murray's ineffectiveness prior to that, he's been dealing with something, because you mentioned before that could have been, something about his game. He's been working on it, of course. We've, seen the video and the pictures now of him wearing those special glasses. He's been able to practice. He's been able to get out there. It's not as if he's been, sidelined and hasn't been on the ice at all for the Leafs in between games. But as Sheldon Keefe mentioned, something flared up on him prior to the game tonight, and he was not able to go. But let's hear from the head coach of the Maple Leafs, who gave his assessment of this 6-2 loss to Ottawa.
Well, I put Sammy in a terrible spot. So there's that terrible spot. And then we didn't take care of him when he was in there. But like I said, we played a great first period. So I don't think it had effect on the team in that way, because I was really happy with our first period. We fell down on the 4-on-4 and lost our structure there and opened up the middle of the ice in the first goal early. But from there, I thought we were really good in the first period. Didn't give up really anything beyond the 4-on-4 goal. They didn't have a scoring chance beyond that. And we had plenty. So lots to like about the first period, but clearly from the drop of the puck in the second period, we were not the same team.
Yeah, that was not the case for the Maple Leafs tonight. Things really took a turn for the worse. And, puck management, I think, is really what stood out tonight, Dave. A lot of, bad turnovers in their own end, some bad turnovers in the neutral zone that led to goals. And, that was something that we saw creep up on the Maple Leafs in the last game against the New York Rangers, a game that they ultimately did win. But, recently they just have not been taking care of the puck. And that is definitely a hallmark of Sheldon Keefe and the system that they want to play. It's a puck possession game. And when you're turning it over in your own zone and you're turning it over at the blue line, your own blue line, or in the neutral zone, you're just asking for trouble. And right now it's coming back to bite the Maple Leafs pretty hard.
Yeah, there were mistakes aplenty in this. Connor Timmins coming back into it. I remember one where he kind of threw up a pizza, like in the clearing attempt, that just didn't look very good. I mean, 43% and 44% the expected goal share at 5-on-5 for the Leafs in period number 2 and number 3. That just, against the Ottawa Senators, like that just, it's inexplicable. Like I know there's been situations where the Leafs don't kind of go full throttle against the lower teams in the standings, but there was really no excuse for this one. Like even in games against Montreal where, they lost in overtime or whatever the case may be, they didn't have this. There's a disturbing trend that's kind of happening where they have 1 or 2 bad periods in a game. This one was kind of bad because they had 2 bad late periods. Nothing egregiously bad, but these were really bad. And in the games before that, they would have a 20-minute session where their expected goal share was so low that it just seemed like it was a completely different game among the rest of it. And so this was kind of the same, but just second and third period giveaways, it just looked really bad. And there's only so much Samsonov can do in that situation, particularly the workload that he had today. So I don't even know what to make of this. Maybe a bit concerning that the Leafs were only able to muster 2 goals without Auston Matthews there and different kind of looks. They did try Pontus Holmberg for the first 2 periods as a second line center. They moved him down to the third period once that clearly wasn't working. And Sheldon Keefe said 6 minutes in penalties is way too much to take. And that's what happened with Holmberg in this situation. So learning lessons. So I don't know. This was weird. Friday night, they usually don't play Friday at home. I don't know if that has some weird voodoo behind it, but it had a weird feel overall. But the day started terribly with the Auston Matthews news. And then this goaltending thing just became such an odd distraction given the circumstances in which it all unfolded.
Yeah, and I think as well, just watching the game tonight, one thing that the Leafs seemed to have trouble with was with Ottawa's speed and their forecheck. And the Sens, if you're going to give them credit with something this year, they are an entertaining team to watch from an offensive side of things. They've got a lot of talent in that top 6 for sure. And they did a great job of just pressuring the Maple Leafs in a lot of situations, leading to those turnovers. Morgan Riley said that the team just did not play particularly well on this night.
I think
I think you can look at the effort to a certain extent. You can look at execution, turnovers. I think that there's lots of things that we didn't do well tonight, and lots of areas where we lost to them, not just on the score sheet. There's lots of areas, and an opportunity to learn from it. We got 2 more between now and the break, so we got to make sure we get better and execute.
Yeah, Dave, and luckily, there haven't been a ton of these games this year, especially on home ice. It was only the, 4th regulation loss for the Maple Leafs at Scotiabank Arena this year. There's been a few stinkers, when you just look a couple weeks back on the calendar. The game against Detroit on the road wasn't great. I know it was the second half of a back-to-back. You go beyond that, we remember that awful game against the Seattle Kraken on home ice. So, there've been a few games here or there that are kind of similar to this, but the Maple Leafs have gone through a recent stretch here there where they've been in a lot of competitive games. So this has not been really a case where it's been an every night thing for this team right now, but it is concerning when you lose an Auston Matthews in the first game that you go out there and you're wondering how is this team going to fare without their number one guy, that they just lay an egg on home ice against. No offense to the Senators, who I just gave a little bit of praise that, they're an entertaining team. They are not a playoff team. Like, this is not a team that has aspirations of being a cup contender this year. Maybe Pierre Dorion did prior to the season, but as it stands right now, this is not, some super well-oiled machine. They have their flaws too, and to get creamed like this on home ice by the Senators is just a bad look overall.
I would argue this is, if not the worst loss of the season, probably one of them, given how late it was and the goal disparity behind it, and none of them coming via empty net goals. Like, they just, the chances that they gave up were so bad, and in a situation where, yeah, your goalie's been strong, but you got to hold on and just go play. All you have to do is just play simple, fundamental defensive hockey against this team. That's what the Senators have really kind of struggled with. And just take care of that stuff and don't look for the high-end chances. And this would have been an easy one for them. But I don't know if they're looking past it. There are 2 more games before a big, long break coming up. That's certainly everyone's looking forward to, myself included. Yeah, there was just so much there that this game just looked bad on all ends, and there's not really much else to say. But I think this could be their worst loss of the season because the goal disparity, the level of opponent, the circumstances behind it. I don't even know if Auston Matthews being in this would have made much of a difference because of just how crazy it was back and forth. Certainly, the second line would have been helped out with more of a depth with the Matthews Tavares 1-2 punch. But yeah, there are some issues there. And with Matthews out for a little while, curious to see if this turns into anything more, or if they just get it together and just become a finely tuned machine on defense like they had been previously, because all they really had to do was just get their positioning back in order, and this wouldn't have gotten away from them like it had.
Yeah, tough for Pontus Holmberg, as Sheldon Keefe mentioned. 6 minutes of penalties is way too much to be taking. And I, was one of those people that was excited coming into this one to see what he could do with a bigger role. And, if he doesn't take those penalties, maybe we're talking about a different experience for Pontus Holmberg, but he did. And that obviously led to Alex Kerfoot getting an opportunity over him later in the stages of this game. And, I wonder if Sheldon Keefe maybe goes back to him on Sunday just to give him another chance, or if he just saw too much negative tonight from Holmberg. Maybe it was a little bit too much, too fast for a guy that's, we still have to remember, while he's been really good this year, is still a rookie at the NHL level, and to jump into these top 6 minutes can be, tough at times. So unfortunate evening for Pontus Holmberg, but an unfortunate evening for a lot of Maple Leafs. And as we heard from Sheldon Keefe off the top, this was not Ilya Samsonov's fault. I mean, he gets thrust in there right before puck drop. I feel bad because his numbers have been so good with his recent run, and now the numbers have gone down a little bit because of this effort where he unfortunately gives up 6 goals to the Ottawa Senators. But let's hear from the Maple Leafs netminder, who says he's just on to the next one.
I don't want to say bad about my teammates or defenseman or something. Yeah. We need a head up after this game. We need a head up tomorrow. Back to hard work and more concentration. We need to get some hard practice tomorrow and good concentration about game.
Yeah, it's pretty simple for Ilya Samsonov, Dave, and he's always going to keep his chin up and be a positive guy. And as he said, he doesn't want to say anything bad about his teammates. He knows he has to do a better job as well. But I'm sure if you gave him the truth serum, he would say, what the hell, guys? Like, that was pretty awful in front of me tonight.
Yeah, I mean, it was not great. There were maybe one goal he would maybe have liked to have back, but the chances were insane. Like they were just insane. Like it's not reflected in the stats, but the way things kind of went back on the other end and the stretches that he had to make. There was one time I remember, I believe it was in the second period, where there was this tic-tac-toe play that Ottawa didn't complete, and it forced Samsonov into so many different positions that he was like in almost at the hash marks, like on the side, because he was so contorted because no one was taking away any of the lanes. Like it's just simple stuff. If you make your goalie have to do 2 or 3 moves to defend the pass, it's almost impossible for him to stop. Like the defensemen are there to take away the lanes so that the goalie can get a square shot at the puck. And to Morgan Riley's admission, they didn't do that in front of him. Like they really didn't. So the turnovers, the lack of execution offensively, and just not being in the right positions in the back end created a disaster situation. Credit to Brady Tkachuk, who scored twice. As you mentioned off the top, they have weapons and they've been pretty good at times and showed some sort of offensive brilliance, but this is a team that just doesn't get things done defensively. And it's one of those things where I think Toronto should have just adapted to their game and just kind of stuck and hung back, similar to how they did against the Carolina Hurricanes when they knew, the situation had called for a weird adjustment and they kind of had to just go full bore the other way, just sit back. This would have been an easy one for them to kind of go and have the high flying chances the other way, and they probably would have had better quality chances at the net had they done it.
So, like I said before, it's going to be interesting to see what happens on Sunday, what the goaltending situation is going to be. If Matt Murray is ready to go, maybe you throw him in there, because I don't think you want to be throwing that guy in against the Boston Bruins as his next game next Wednesday. So you would think maybe it's that game or that's it for Murray.
I think they may have to call someone up.
Break is over. But I was going to say, maybe it's a scenario where, tomorrow we find out Matt Murray's going on injured reserve for a bit here to get right. And Joseph Woll, who I see again tonight, continues to roll with the Marlies. He's now 12-1 with a .928 save percentage. So he's having a phenomenal season down with the Marlies. I don't think he would necessarily get into the game on Sunday, but you never know because Samsonov has been playing a lot and you want to have him fresh for that game against the Bruins on Wednesday before the break. But as we record this now on Friday night, we're all just kind of speculating at this point. But I don't think I'd be surprised if we get some news either Saturday or maybe Sunday that maybe Joseph Woll will be making an appearance for the Maple Leafs.
Yeah, the Marlies are in Manitoba, and both Woll and Källgren were in the lineup. Woll starting and Källgren backing up. Wouldn't be too far-fetched to at least fly him over to get him to play. The Leafs have space to call someone up, even if they don't put Murray on IR. So, they could just flip one guy out, take him out, don't have a scratch, do something like that. I can't see a situation where Murray's going to be an option for them in 2 days. If something flared up and he couldn't play, then I don't see how that settles down in a couple of days, nor would you want to even put him in that spot. At the same time, you don't want to burn out Samsonov either, and getting that day off before the Boston Bruins, where you have a couple days off after that, is an ample amount of recovery time. So that's the thing. Sean Keefe said earlier in the week that actually said it this morning when explaining why Matt Murray was going in tonight, that they felt they were pushing it by putting Samsonov in that game against the New York Rangers. So extending that further, where maybe the game for him to take off should have been the one against the Islanders. But if Murray was hurt this whole time, that's what's so weird. We're not getting the whole story, and I get it. Hockey's such where they're just not going to disclose it, but there's missing pieces to the story for sure in this goaltending situation, because a lot of things didn't equate tonight. Like, for example, if Matt Murray is what was not available to come on, why is he on the bench? Like, that's just not something that happens. Like, the goalie who can't play is not on the bench in full equipment. He had his full equipment on, like blocker, glove, pads, everything, jersey. So none of this made any sense. There's missing pieces here.
Yeah, I mean, sometimes it is just the simplest answer, and maybe it's just, like I said,
We've tried.
Yeah. If he really needed to play, he could go, but they didn't want to have that, I guess.
Well,
they didn't want to put him in there.
So in the post game, he was asked if Ilya had got hurt, would Murray have been able to you? And they said no. We would have had to put in a bug. So
interesting.
That's why none of this equates.
Yeah. Okay. That doesn't make sense at all. Now I'm just confused about everything. Like you said, there's something going on here. Not saying that the Maple Leafs are, mismanaging this, but it's just not a good look. If that is truly the case, Matt Murray could not appear in this game.
Here's the other thing. You know what? Like, if you believe in both of your guys, why not disclose that Matt Murray's dealing with something? So we're going to ride Samsonov for a little bit. Plus, he's playing confident. You can have both can be true, right? Like, that way, you're like, Murray's not kind of getting, the dung thrown on him about his poor play. There's a valid excuse. They could work with him, and he'll be back when he's back. And you call someone up and you put him on IR for a week. Like, it's not a big deal. But, like, that's why, like, everything with all of this just seems to be fairly inconsistent, that there's some sort of, like, puzzle piece that's just not being disclosed right now. It's like a 1,000 piece puzzle, and piece number 999 out of 1,000. You have the 1,000th piece, but, like, number 999 is not there, and so you have this puzzle with a little hole in the top right corner, and you can't figure out where it is. And that's this whole goaltending situation right now.
Yeah, well, hopefully we'll get some more clarity over the next couple of days here with regards to Matt Murray. So we touched on a little bit with Auston Matthews, and on any other given day, that's probably the lead story, and we're spending a lot of time on it. But because of the goalie stuff and this game being so weird, we definitely had to get through that first. But so Auston Matthews out a minimum of 3 weeks with a knee sprain that he suffered against the New York Rangers. He finished the game. So I don't think anybody was even really, considering this, but pretty evident that something was bugging him after that. He went and got some imaging, and this is the news that the team has received. So he will not be taking part in the All-Star game, obviously. We thought maybe William Nylander would get the nod, but the NHL decides to throw the Florida faithful a bone, and Alexander Barkov will be the final representative for the Atlantic Division. But, what was your instant thought when you first saw the Auston Matthews news come down?
Yeah, my instant thought was, oh boy, this is something that happens with Auston Matthews. Every now and then there's an ailment of some kind that's going to keep him out for a while. And this happens to be knee. Like everybody, I started looking at footage, and nothing was obvious. And as you mentioned, he finished the game. Remember, he was about to step onto the ice for that overtime, right? Before the Leafs scored. So afterwards, Sheldon Keefe says that, he was in discomfort. He noticed him in discomfort a couple times, and he woke up. He was still sore in that area. So they brought him in for an MRI, and that's when they learned that he's going to be out, or he's going to need to be out. And so, my brain immediately goes to the fact that while that's not great news, it's only 3 weeks, although they did say minimum. So because it's minimum, you don't really know exactly how long he's going to be out. There is the fact that it's a light schedule. They have the bye week coming up, and then afterwards they've got 4 games like 2 against Columbus, and they've got Chicago and then Buffalo. Buffalo is red hot, but outside of that, they've got some pretty easy competition coming out of the break as well, that you could conceivably have Auston Matthews back for some of your more meaningful games, provided he's on the earlier end of that timeline. So I think all of that was that, but also like the Leafs record, I think it's 31-16-2 without Auston Matthews ever since he's been a Maple Leaf. So the fact that they've been able to generate results where they are in the standings, and they really couldn't go down too much unless Buffalo really gets hot and Toronto really gets like not, then there wasn't really much concern there. If anything, this not being a major injury is one where it doesn't really help them with the cap stuff, because if he comes back soon, I mean, that's still $11 million they're going to have to make space for. So didn't really think too much of it, other than, yeah, Auston Matthews gets hurt every now and then, so didn't kind of completely surprise me.
Yeah, and if there is a silver lining with this, it's that it's happening now in a part of the season where the schedule is pretty light. You've got the break coming up too, so he's not going to miss maybe as many games as he would if this was happening at any other point in the season, and hopefully he can just get healthy overall. I mean, this is a new thing that he's got to deal with now with the knee, but maybe whatever else he was dealing with earlier this season that forced him to miss a couple of games, that can heal up a lot better. So you can look at it that way, because the Maple Leafs, really aren't going to move much in the standings. Like, I don't think they're just going to completely go in the tank now. And even if they do, I mean, they're still going to face the Lightning, right? It's just either it's going to be happening in Tampa Bay or it's going to be happening in Toronto. They would have to go on just an all-time, crapper of a run here to just completely fall out of it. And I don't think that's going to be the case. So, it's not great that Auston Matthews is going to miss another chunk of time like he has many times throughout his NHL career so far. But if you were going to put it in any part of the schedule, this is probably the best time to do it. All right, coming up on Rink Wide Toronto, we'll get to the Bodog line of the day. The Senators hammer the Maple Leafs 6-2. You're listening to Rink Wide Toronto, sponsored by Bodog. Free casino games and sports odds. It is time to play at bodog.net. It's Rink Wide Toronto, pregame, postgame, every game.
Naslund.
We weren't afraid of facing any line or any deep pairing because we knew that we would generate offense.
Bertuzzi.
I was like, I can play in this league and I can play a big role in this league and I can be dominant if all the stars align.
Morrison.
There was a confidence that we believed if we went out and played the way we were capable, we could score every shift.
Their story in their words. Unreal West Coast Express, available on January 31st on Apple, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts.
The calendar's flipped to 2023. So what year was your company's website last upgraded? It's Ray Ferraro. Right now, my friends at North Beach, along with their partners at Craft Growth, are offering small business owners and entrepreneurs a free website digital audit, so you can find out exactly how your website really stacks up against the competition. Your online presence has never been more important, so visit craftgrowth.net and get your free digital audit. That's craftgrowth.net.
It is Rink Wide Toronto, sponsored by Bodog, the place to play free casino games and get the latest sports odds. Rob Wong joined alongside by David Alter, who was at Scotiabank Arena. Maple Leafs 6-2 losers to the Ottawa Senators tonight. Time for the Bodog line of the day, and surprisingly, the Leafs were favored in this one, even with the Auston Matthews coming out. But as we know, the Sens, Dave, the Habs, we saw it recently as well, always tend to play the Leafs tough no matter what is going on in either of their lives. The Sens remind me a lot of the Leafs from a few years ago, sort of run and gun. We touched on it earlier. The top six fast, a lot of skill, but maybe their defensive game isn't particularly stout, but they are fun to watch. My question to you, maybe if we were talking about a Maple Leafs win, we'd have more things to discuss, but the game was so terrible that there's really not much to break down. The game wasn't the story. It was all the other stuff going on. But just as a quick aside, I mean, we have seen a lot of Battle of Ontarios growing up here. Do you have a specific memory that stands out, whether it's a good one, a bad one, or a random one? Yeah, go ahead.
I have a great one. I'm glad I get to tell this story. So thank you, Rob, for that. So, I grew up a Leaf fan as one does in Toronto, growing up, born and raised, and all that fun stuff. And so 2002, I'm fresh out of my first year of university. Yeah, it was my first year. And just as I finished school, it's the first round of the playoffs also, right? So the Leafs have got the Islanders in Game 7, and Ottawa's waiting for them. And so I invite a bunch of friends over, and we're watching that. And the very moment that the Leafs score the empty net goal to make it 3-0 and cinch the game, I go on Ticketmaster, which was the very last year that Senators tickets were available on Ticketmaster, and do 2 best available, and I get tickets for Game 4 of the Toronto-Ottawa Battle of Ontario. And so we go, and I find out it's like in the 100s. I think it was like section 109 or whatever it was for the lower level, but it was row C. And I'm like, okay, third row, not bad. I get to my seats, and row C is actually the first row because row A and row B are occupied by the Leafs bench. And I'm literally behind Pat Quinn.
Wow.
So I'm just like, wow, this is fantastic. Now, for the young listeners out there, this is how old I feel. There's no camera phones to document this. I remember I couldn't believe where I was, that I actually had to go to the Sens like gift shop or whatever and buy a disposable Sens camera and so that I could take photos of the experience. And I still have like the album of all the photos there. And it was an insane environment because I of course, with it being Ticketmaster, it was like a huge chunk of Leaf fans. It was probably 70%. Like, it was a really high quotient. That was why it was the last year on Ticketmaster, because they really had to kind of get the Leaf fan quota under control there in the following years. But it was insane. It was wild. The Leafs were down 2-1 in the series by the time me and a buddy of mine who now works in the league went. We drove over. And then if you remember, I don't know if you remember, but basically they were up 2-1 late in the third, and Ottawa got a goal in the final minute to tie the game, but it was disallowed. And the Leafs hung on to win that game and tie the series 2-2. And then, of course, because it was a Battle of Ontario, they ended up winning the series, but it was insane. The vibe, that was like my first time in Ottawa for a game, and it was really wild in there. And yeah, and we did that drive and just was only 20 years old at the time. It was pretty fun and exciting.
Yeah, as soon as you said you were behind the bench and you're right behind Pat Quinn, like, just, for whatever reason, the first person that randomly comes to mind, and if you're a Maple Leafs fan and you've watched the team on TV for many years, I don't know who he is. Maybe you do. The tan guy with gray hair and the great suits that is always sitting behind the bench.
I think that guy owns the Octagon Steakhouse in Thornhill.
Sorry to this gentleman. So. I don't know his name, but everybody who watches Maple Leafs games for the last 25 years knows exactly who I'm speaking of.
Yeah.
Like, I'm imagining you sitting like in those seats, but in Ottawa. I guess back then, what was it? Was it still the Corral Center? Like, I don't know. That's way too long ago.
And he was there too, right? Like,
right.
No, but but what's really funny is the seats next to me were these guys from Toronto who had season tickets for the Senators and would just flip all the tickets that were non-Leafs. And they would hang on to their seats for those ones if they were going. And so when the playoffs were there, those were their seats. And so it was such a unique experience just being up there, but like just being like right behind Pat Quinn and that whole experience, like Travis Green and like all these other guys who were on the team. I know it's a random reference, but like I'm just remembering the last photo I took in that role, and it was like Travis Green, like there on the bench, and I can't remember who the backup goalie was. But when he scored, I took a photo, and he's like literally looking right at my camera, celebrating. It was really funny, and so like you'll get selfies back then, but that was kind of like the weirdest vantage point to kind of have photos from that era so close. That was pretty neat.
Yeah, honestly, I mean, there's too many Maple Leaf Senators Battle of Ontario moments to like even talk about. And, luckily, if you're a Maple Leafs fan, there's more good ones than bad ones because of all the success the Leafs had against the Senators in the playoffs in the early 2000s. But I mean, the games that stand out, of course, the big ones, the Patrick Lalime choke game where he was horrendous. I'll never forget. I mean, to this day, just hearing the ping of Matt Sundin's OT winner in game one of the 0-1 playoffs, in that shot, that big slap shot from like the blue line. And it's funny, but my other memory of the Battle of Ontario, at least in the early 2000s, was
Alfredson.
Alfredson, the stick and all that stuff. But I was going to say, just watching it on standard def and like thinking back to those days where, a guy takes a shot and you're like, I can't even see the puck. Like, I don't know what's happening. Like, I just have to wait for players or the crowd to react. Like, that's how I kind of think of, my memories of those days watching those games on just like regular non-cable television.
It looked so great at the time. Like, I remember in the early 2000s, they actually updated the look of Hockey Night in Canada. They had a new score bug and all this other stuff. I'm like, okay, like, it's past the 2000s. We're into the future. It all looks good. Then high definition comes out. And then remember when high definition came out and you tried to watch anything that was on standard def on a high definition television? You're like,
garbage.
Oh my God. Oh, this is complete garbage. It's like you actually need the really crappy technology to watch that to make it look good. Like if it's not on a glass tube, it's going to look absolutely terrible. And, it's amazing how HD and then to some degree 4K has just made everything look like it's running 240 YouTube videos, if you know what I'm talking about. Like, like the low where everything's kind of blurry. Like it kind of almost looks as bad as that.
Yeah. Well, even if you go now, I know the quality is obviously even worse because you have to transfer it over to something like YouTube. But you try to watch any of those highlights, it's just can be kind of tough on the eyes to see those Battle of Ontario games from the early 2000s. All right, got a few minutes left here. An interesting note. I know there are people out there that love these type of things, especially as we get closer to trade deadline. People love tweeting it out. Reporters do when it comes to which GMs or which scouts of which teams are traveling around the league. Now, the scouts thing is whatever. I mean, scout. That's what they do. It's no surprise that you've got certain guys in certain places, but the GMs traveling around definitely do, pique people's interest, whether it's legitimate or whether it's not. But Kyle Dubas, GM of the Toronto Maple Leafs in Vancouver, to watch the Canucks take on the Blue Jackets. There are many interesting names that are taking part in this game. Of course, Vladislav Gavrikov is a name that's been thrown out there and connected to the Maple Leafs. Then on the Vancouver side, of course, you've got a ton of guys, whether it's Luke Schenn, Bo Horvat, Connor Garland, Brock Besser. Are you buying into this at all? That, maybe Kyle Dubas wants to get a look at some of these guys, or do you think it's just maybe he just wants to be in Vancouver on a nice Friday night?
Yeah, I don't know because I know he was in town for the top prospects game, right? And that like a lot of GMs went to that. A lot of people wanted to stay in, but for him to kind of stick around and keep looking at a couple of candidates, one that he has an extensive trade history with in Columbus, and another one in Vancouver, is certainly significant. So perhaps he just is deliberating on a few guys of interest and just wants to make sure some of the eye test look of what they see matches maybe some of the things that they've liked that they've seen from footage. So it's a different perspective when you're just watching tape of a guy and then you're watching it from a bird's eye up in the press box. You actually see their whole 200-foot game because you actually have a view of 200 feet right in front of you, right? So there could be just something like a confirmation of what they like about certain types of guys. So it's significant that he did stay there to take in that game and see a couple of teams that are obviously going to be sellers at the deadline. And so, it will be interesting. Like the Auston Matthews thing is going to be a bit of a wild card, but also injuries that happen anything major that happens injury-wise is going to be interesting, because if they get an injury of some kind of a substantially high salaried player and they're able to use it into LTI, well, that would be very beneficial for them now, wouldn't it? Because they'd be able to dip into that without having to go through many second-party brokers or whatever. And then as other injuries happen, they can make the math work. For example, say they know Auston Matthews is coming back and he's $11 million player, right? So he's coming back, but the trade deadline, he's not back yet. Well, they can go into that money, and if he's not back and then a week later a $5 million player has to go on LTI, and then another $5 million player, and then another couple of transactions to get to 11 happen, they can do that and interchange the money that way, and do the little dance that the Vegas Golden Knights had to do for much of last season. So you can manipulate the cap that way. And so if this Auston Matthews thing does let them do that, they're going to look to exploit every advantage. And so maybe that gives Kyle Dubas an opportunity to look at these guys up close and maybe swing for the fences between now and March 3rd.
I was going to say, I've seen some people throw it out there on Twitter that Kyle Dubas needs to treat Auston Matthews like the Lightning did Nikita Kucherov a couple of seasons ago, where he was clearly ready to play hockey, but was not ready to actually play a game until game one of the playoffs. Shockingly, he was ready to go for game one of the playoffs, even though he was seen skating and practicing, but he's not ready to play yet. And then, it's one of my favorite gifs. It's the Kevin Nash in the wheelchair, and he pulls off the blanket, and he's like ready to go. Because it's the fake leg, where he's got the fake leg, and it's like, that was Nikita Kucherov. It's like Nikita Kucherov not ready to play, but game one of the playoffs, rips off the blanket, and he's ready to go. Like, you could, maybe do something like that with Auston Matthews. I think that the Maple Leafs probably wouldn't do that, but as you said, maybe there's a
they don't have to do that. Like, look, with I remember what it was, and I'm gonna stumble on this, so I'm sure our listeners will correct it. But basically, when they had an injury or they didn't have room for money to activate guys, Mark Stone went on LTI right after, right? Like, they had other guys who make that money that they were able to interchange the money with. And the Leafs did it last year too, or not last year, in 2021. They did it when Frederik Andersen was on LTI for pretty much the whole season after February. And then with 11 games left to go, which was the very last day anyone would have been eligible for LTI, they had injuries to both Zach Hyman and Zach Bogosian, and the cap hits of both players allowed them to activate Frederik Andersen and put those two guys on LTI and allow for Andersen to get one regular season game in before the playoffs began. So there's interchanging of the monies that they can do well after. And what's the one thing the Leafs did this year, Rob? Everyone was talking about going into the summer after they signed Calle Jarnkrok that they're over the cap and they have to do something. Well, they didn't have to do anything because there was an injury immediately in training camp, and they never did trade any of those guys. They kept everybody. So it wouldn't surprise me if they kept everybody and then found more money for themselves and then just let injuries and other things that could happen later in the year with LTI interchange the money to make it all work and go after the players they want regardless of cost.
Yeah, definitely some options here for the Maple Leafs to figure out what they may or may not do with the cap situation. But tough one right now without Auston Matthews, and a tough one for the Maple Leafs as they lose 6-2 to the Senators, but they'll try to bounce back on Sunday when they take on the Washington Capitals. Make sure to like, review, subscribe to the pod wherever you get your favorite podcasts. You can follow us on Twitter at RinkWideTOR, at DAlter, and at RobWong34. And you can always get the pod at RinkWideToronto.com. For David Alter and producer Aaron, I'm Rob Wong. You've been listening to Rink Wide Toronto, sponsored by Bodog, Canada's home for casino games and sports odds, where everyone goes to play. You've been listening to Rink Wide Toronto, pre-game, post-game, every game.
Hey, it's Ray Ferraro and Darren Drager from the Ray and Drakes Hockey Podcast. Drakes, we're getting into your favorite part of the year. It's insider season.
Yeah, the March 3rd trade deadline is in sight, and general managers' phones are ringing as front offices are trying to figure out what they're doing, buyers, sellers, and the storylines, Ray, and the trade rumors, they're blowing up now across the league.
Yeah, we got it all covered, Drakes, along with the top hockey guests, twice weekly, here on the Ray and Drakes Hockey Podcast. Check us out everywhere you get your podcasts.